Okay, folks, it's time to get started because I know you have other things to do today. It's hard to believe the semester's almost over. Alan Kinley is here with us today. Of all our speakers, he's the only one that's really at A&M. And Mark Johnson was here local, but everyone else has been from out of state somewhere. But Alan's been nice enough to come to some of my classes and speak. And he has a long-standing history, 26 years at A&M, so he's seen a lot of changes here. He would tell you the story about stepping out of his office and looking out the window where he could see nothing but fields, which now there are buildings everywhere. And but he has an interesting story. Some of you may know him. I think someone mentioned that one of the ex-phys labs, you had a lab with him. Anyway, we appreciate you coming today. I know it looks like some people are taking the day off, which is fine, but we have one more class period next Wednesday and before the break. So anyway, and by the way, not too many strength coaches have 2 terminal degrees. And so Dr. Kinley is he wouldn't tell you that, but I just did. Anyway, we appreciate you coming. We got a couple stragglers coming in here, so we'll let them come in. Now I'm going to have to introduce them all over again.
We are here. Hello.
All right, so Dr. Kinley, thanks for joining us. Please welcome Dr. Kinley. Oh, come on.
All right, thank you. I wanted to give a little different talk. I'm usually talking about either periodization or some scientific principles behind strength and conditioning. And I thought history would be a good topic today. My wife's a history teacher, so I get a lot of history back at home. Whenever we travel, we have to visit all the historical sites. So I thought history would be a little bit different, probably of a change than what you've heard before. Now, I've got 40 years of strength training. Why did I pick 40 years? I hate to say this because that's how long I've been doing this. Here in a few years, I'll be saying a 50-year presentation on this, unfortunately. But hopefully I can make it to the 60-year time. I'm going to try to keep you entertained here for the next hour. Some of the things I'm going to talk about, again, obviously we'll go back past 40 years. And I'm going to do something here. I'm running 2 computers here. I'm a MacBook fan. Anybody MacBook fans in here? Okay, I'm a MacBook fan. And we couldn't get it to quite sync up. So I'm going to be running 2 computers here at the same time. Hopefully I won't mix one up with the other. But obviously the history of strength and conditioning goes way back. And there's an example of Milo, the ancient tale goes that he picked up a calf when it was very small and he was younger, and he picked it up and he carried it every day. And of course, as the calf grew, it got to be where it was heavier and heavier, and he really was the first one to do a progressive strength and conditioning program. So obviously I'm going to go way past what we are. I'm not going to start back this far, but strength and conditioning goes way back to the ancient Greeks and ancient civilizations, but we're going to skip forward and go to present day. But before I can go back even to that point, I've got to cover another area. And we're going to go back to a gentleman by the name of Bob Hoffman. Now, most of you probably haven't heard of Bob Hoffman. You wouldn't know who he was. Passed away in 1985. But actually, Bob Hoffman started out, he founded the York Oil Burner Corporation. Why was it called York? Anybody, any guesses here? I always like to engage the audience, keep you from going to sleep. Well, you know. York, Pennsylvania, which is not too far from Gettysburg. I guess Gettysburg 150 years today, is that right? If we know our history. The Gettysburg Address, not too far from there, not too far from Harrisburg. But York, Pennsylvania is where Bob Hoffman started the York Oil Burner Corporation. Now, why would oil burning be, during this early 1920s, 30s, why would that be important in Pennsylvania? It gets cold there. Here we don't have any oil burning furnaces, but up there you do. So he was in the oil burning business, but he had suffered and had some ailments as a child, and he started this company and he wanted to get some more health benefits. So he started lifting weights, and he became very enthused about lifting weights, and he started later making barbells and dumbbells and things of that nature. So it became the York Barbell Company. And we're gonna, if you ever happen to be traveling through that area, there's a mile marker sitting out for Bob Hoffman. And I'll just read it to you very briefly. He's the father of world weightlifting and founder of the York Barbell Club. Was the U.S. Olympic weightlifting coach from 1948 to 1964. Also actively promoted the sports of powerlifting, bodybuilding, served as an official advisor on youth physical fitness for these presidents, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Nixon. He founded the York Barbell Company on Broad Street here in 1932. So if you're ever traveling in that area, make sure you stop by and check this out. Now, he was a strong advocate, again, of weightlifting, also of bodybuilding, and he also, these York plates, if you go to our strength facility right now, you'll find 16 sets of those, bumper plates, any of you that have ever seen our facility right now. So York is still in business, still makes a lot of equipment, and still viable to this day. In fact, we're in this Kyle construction process. We're tearing down our facility. If you went by there today, you'll see it's got a big hole in it, our Needham Steed facility, and we're in the process of building a new facility. And I tried to reorder these bumper plates that we have because very well made, very solid, very good equipment, and they don't make them anymore. They're still making other equipment. They're not making this particular bumper plate anymore. I was real disappointed about that. All right, Bob Hoffman. Now, this next gentleman I'm going to talk about, we're going to tie into with Bob Hoffman, a guy by the name of Alvin Roy. Anybody heard of Alvin Roy before? All right, we're going to talk about Alvin for a few minutes. Alvin ended up owning a chain of strength and health studios. He put these in back in the 1950s. And Alvin Roy was a graduate of Estruma High School in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He later walked on as a basketball player at LSU. He went off and served under General Patton in World War II. Now this ties together here, you'll get it in a moment. After the war, Bob Hoffman was taking his U.S. Olympic weightlifting teams to world competitions, and they were in Paris, France that year. Now, what condition was Paris, France in after World War II? What condition was it in? What condition was Germany in? Most of Europe. It was in very bad shape. A lot of bombing had gone on, a lot of destruction. So Bob Hoffman was very worried about his team being even fed well enough, places to stay. So he went to the military, he went to Washington, D.C., and he said, I need some help. I need somebody to be able to take care of the U.S. team while we're going to be there for 3 weeks. Who was assigned to help him? There was a captain by the name of Alvin Roy. Alvin Roy met Bob Hoffman. He stayed with the U.S. Olympic lifting team for those 3 weeks. He made sure they had their provisions, made sure they had their housing. He took very good care of them, and he became good friends with Bob Hoffman. Thus, he saw what the weightlifters were doing. Now, the prevailing time, what was it thought about a weightlifter? If you lifted weights in the 1930s, what was the implications for that? They thought you were going to be muscle bound. They thought you were going to be stiff. They thought it was going to make you slow. Most coaches, it was forbidden for a player to lift weights during that time. But Alvin Roy, again, he had played high school sports at Estruma High School. Remember the name Estruma? We're going to come back to that. He had went to LSU, played basketball, walk-on basketball player there. He had been involved in athletics all his life. He was also on the track team in high school also. So he had a varied background, football, basketball, track. And he saw the weightlifters on the U.S. team be able to out-jump higher than most people had ever seen jump. He could see them run very fast. He saw how powerful they were, and they had been lifting weights. And this was the opposite of what he had been taught. So he got excited about it. Alvin Roy left after Paris and stayed in contact with Bob Hoffman, opened up these studios that we're seeing, and equipped them with York equipment. And he went to Estruma High School. Estruma, there were two high schools in Baton Rouge at a time. There was Baton Rouge High, opened up about 1880. Estruma High School came along later. And they were obviously, what happens when two schools split in the same city like that? What do they become? They become rivals. Well, Estruma told him, no, we don't want to try your weightlifting. You know, it's going to make us muscle bound, it's going to make us slow, so we don't want to try it. But anyway, Estruma, the next year, was ran off the field by Baton Rouge High School. So the principal and the head coach there, they were brothers, they went back to Alvin and says, well, maybe we need to try something different. Maybe we need to try your weightlifting. Estruma High School tries the weightlifting. So what happens? They win the state championship. Now he has credibility. Let's tie this together now. One day at Estruma High School, there was a young man by the name of Billy Cannon. And Billy Cannon's an interesting individual I'll give you a little history on. But Billy Cannon, as you can see there, LSU won the national championship in 1958. Billy Cannon was the Heisman Trophy winner during that year. Billy Cannon lived down the street from Alvin Roy's health club. He had went to Estruma High School. However, he didn't lift with the high school guys because he was a three-sport athlete. He ran the 100 meters, he ran the 200 meters, and he threw the shot put. He was exempt because he was always in season doing something, so they didn't have him lifting. Well, anyway, Billy Cannon saw all his friends from Estruma lifting weights, and he saw how they became more powerful and stronger. He wanted to do it. Alvin Roy stated one day when Billy Cannon walked into his facility, it was one of the scariest days of his life. Why was that? Alvin Roy knew that if he made Billy Cannon slower, that his career was over. Nobody would ever buy into what he was doing. But what happened with Billy Cannon? He started lifting the weights. He started getting a lot of improvement. Estruma had won the state championship. His 100-meter dash time went down. So all of a sudden, there's credibility there. Paul Dietzel from LSU was the head football coach at the time. Came in 1955. So we're going up to 1958. Paul Dietzel went to Alvin Roy and says, let's try your strength training program. So the LSU Tigers started strength training. They were one of the first collegiate programs that we're aware of that started a strength and conditioning program. So Alvin Roy is known as one of the really first collegiate strength and conditioning coaches. And again, I know this is past my 40 years, but this is tying this all in together as the history of how I got in the profession I'm in now. And it goes back to Billy Cannon, LSU, Estruma High School. Now, Billy Cannon, just an interesting side note to entertain you. Billy Cannon won the Heisman Trophy. Later on went and got his dental degree, became an orthodontist. Anybody know the story of Billy Cannon? What happened to him? Nobody knows? In the early 80s, he was an orthodontist, over $300,000 a year income in the early 80s. A lot of money. You can probably put that up to about $400,000 or $500,000 annually right now, if not more. He got caught in a counterfeiting scheme, one of the largest in the U.S. history, printing $100 bills. And he got caught, got sent for prison for a couple of years. Interesting how he went from the top of the world down to the bottom of the world real quickly. So Billy Cannon was a legend in Louisiana. And to this day on Halloween, they replay a famous run that he made. LSU was #1 in the nation. Ole Miss was #3 in the nation. It was a tie ball game. He ran a punt back 70 yards. Won the game for LSU. Ends up securing the national championship for him. To this day in Louisiana, you go over to the Baton Rouge area, you ask somebody about Halloween and Billy Cannon, they'll tell you that story. I can assure you. But anyway, so he goes from the pinnacle of being the star in Louisiana goes down to the bottom. Interesting that he was out of work when he got out of prison. Obviously, there weren't any patients that would go see him. Had to put a recorder on his phone to answer his phone because there was nobody calling to get business. One of the persons that was in charge of the prison system in Louisiana at Angola called them in because they needed a dentist. And they had a real bad dental program going. And they, took a chance and asked him if he'd take over the dental program. Well, he did and made it very successful. He took a lot of pride. He finally had another mission in his life. And then this person said, he did so well at the dental school, let's take over the whole medical program for the prisons in Louisiana. And he does that now. Now, recently, he had a medical condition this past year. I know, so his health is not as well, but he really is a story of somebody that was at the top, went to the bottom, and came back up, and I'd like to add that. Now, this is how collegiate strength and conditioning coaches, this is really the beginning for us, was Paul Dietzel, the head LSU football coach who died this past year. Joe Dean, the longtime LSU AD, died this week too, if any of you don't know that name. I'm gonna throw this in for just some thought for you. Alvin Roy being the first strength and conditioning coach. And I'm kind of getting off the subject here for a moment. How many read the book Outliers? Raise your hand. All right, then y'all know what I'm talking about here. Now, go back to Bob Hoffman. Bob Hoffman was an energetic about weightlifting, and he preached to a lot of people, didn't he? Do you not think there was somebody else that probably took his ideas and went back to their high school? But what happened? They might have went, instead of going 10-0 and winning the state championship, they went 5-5 or 4-6. The year before they were 0-10. They probably had great improvement, but did they win the state championship? In the book Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell, you need to read this book, especially if you're in this business, going to be in the coaching business. It's a great book to really provoke some thought about how we rely upon each other. And in this instance, Alvin Roy had the knowledge and he had the opportunity at the right time. What if Estruma had not won the state championship? What if Billy Cannon had not walked into his place and his 100-yard time had gone up, or he had never walked in the first place? What if LSU had not won the national championship? So this is an example where, again, Alvin Roy gets to be the father of strength and conditioning at the collegiate level, but the circumstances brought that together. I know Malcolm Gladwell, he interviewed Bill Gates. Who's Bill Gates? Richest man in the world. And he talks about how Bill Gates, he had access with his computer club when he was in high school to some computer programming. And then he also had access to the University of Washington there, where he could get in access to the mainframes and to the computers. And with that access, he became a programmer before anybody else did. He had access to that. And then what happens with Bill Gates if IBM doesn't buy his first program? You know, we don't even know who he is. He would probably, as Malcolm Gladwell points out, he would probably still be a successful businessman, very smart, very intelligent, very energetic individual. He'd probably still be a millionaire, probably making $1 million or $2 million a year, but would he be worth $50 billion right now? Probably not. So all of us in our lives, right here, the fact that you're sitting in here and you're at Texas A&M, you have an opportunity a lot of people don't have. You got to know that you have this opportunity. You've had greater opportunity than most people that aren't sitting in here. And you got to learn to, again, these guys had to recognize that they had that opportunity, had the energy and the energetic enough to act upon that whenever an opportunity does present itself. So always be alert when an opportunity comes to you. All right, now I'm getting to my 40 years. I'm going to go to 1970 here. All right, I'm going to give you a little review of 1970. Let's look at what was going on in 1970. Most popular TV show. I love this show. I can still sing the song right now. I'm not going to because I don't want y'all to get up and all leave if I sing, but because my singing's pretty bad. The Beverly Hillbillies. You know, Uncle Jed, Granny. Great show in the 1970s. See, some of you shaking your head. You might can go back that far to remember that. What else is going on in 1970? Texas A&M reached a whole 14,000 students. Wow. And what are we at, over 50,000 right now? Look at Kyle Field. And of course, look what's going on out there right now. What else is going on in 1970? 36 cents a gallon. I could fill my car up for about $7. And this is no kidding, this is a little later. When I was in college, I came from a family of 10, and we obviously weren't very wealthy by any means. And I was on a full scholarship, the only way I could afford to go to college. And my mom would send me $20 a month. And $20 a month, I could fill my car up halfway. $10 bought me half a tank, and then I still had $10 left to, go buy a 50-cent Whataburger or McDonald's or something of that nature. All right, what else in 1970? That's not me, but I did have 2 leisure suits. I do have a picture of me in a leisure suit. I couldn't find it. I really wanted to find it and put it up, but that is not me. And my leisure suit wasn't green and plaid, but it was close to that. I had the shoes. I thought I looked good in that shirt with those wide, collars that they had on them then. But anyway, I'm setting up for the 1970s. In the 1970s, I started lifting weights. I was an 8th grader. I went up to the high school I was going to attend. I asked the football coach there, can I start working out? I'm going to be in school here next year in the 9th grade. And the coach looked at me and he said, sure. Here, he let me in, got me a locker and said, here's our weight room. And I went into the weight room, and there was a young gentleman there by the name of Larry Terrell. I'm in debt to Larry to this day, but Larry was a distance runner. And he later became an Army Ranger. And I did what Larry did. So what's wrong there? Larry was a distance runner, became an Army Ranger. What does an Army Ranger need? Was anybody here a Ranger? Or anybody here in Special Forces? What do those guys need? Do they need a lot of power or do they need endurance? Lots of endurance. Larry told me about how when he became an Army Ranger, they took him out in a helicopter. They dropped him off in the middle of the Everglades. Says, get yourself back. We'll see you in 3 days. He had to live off the provisions he had in his backpack for 3 days. So they had to have a lot of endurance. Again, Larry was a very good distance runner. So I was doing what Larry did. What were we doing? Well, we'd go in, we'd bench press. There was a bench press in there. And what would we do at the bench press? We'd get on there and we'd do a few reps and add weight, get a few more reps, add weight, and we'd go till we couldn't go anymore. So we'd max out about once a week. We'd max out. What's wrong with maxing out once a week? Anything? Well, what we were doing was, we were trying to lift as heavy as we could every time we went into the weight room. We had no idea of periodization concepts or anything of that nature. Oh, we had to do our curls because we knew that, we wanted big biceps so that we looked like we'd been lifting weights. And then we'd go out and we'd do distance running. Now, if you're a power athlete, do you distance run? No. It's very counterproductive for you to distance run. So I was doing all the wrong things, but this was all I knew. There was nobody to tell me what to do. So I was following what Larry did, and Larry didn't know what to do, but he was a senior at the time, and so that's the kind of a routine he came up with. Well, and again, this 40-year history, I'm skewing it a little bit towards what I know. Now, if you were living in California in the 70s, was this same thing going on? I don't know. If you were living up in New York, some other scenario might be going on. Again, I'm basing this on my scenario, on what I know, what happened to me with these past 40 years of strength and conditioning. Well, the next year, going into my sophomore year, my junior year in high school, a guy by the name of Al Miller came along to be a coach. Now, I'll give you a little story on Al. Al had lifted weights, started in junior high. He had been in college. He was an avid weightlifter. And he knew what to do weightlifting-wise. And Al was one of the first guys that told us what to do. So what did Al have us doing? He made us squat. He made us do power cleans, and he made us do sprints. So now we're getting into the right ballpark on training. Al later on became the strength coach at Alabama under Bear Bryant. He went on to coach at New York Giants, Denver Broncos, Atlanta Falcons. He retired. Now he's the strength coach for the Oakland Raiders. So Al's still going at it. Our National Association, which I'll talk about a little bit later, elected him one of our first legends in the field because he's one of the true pioneers in the field. And we talk about the book I went back about outliers. What was my opportunity there? All of a sudden, I get a guy that's one of the legends in our field now, came in to be my coach. And not only did he coach me my junior and senior year in high school, when I went to college, he went with me, and he was my position coach for 4 more years. So I was exposed with Al's strength program for 6 straight years there. And again, he got us on track of doing the right things that we should be doing. Squats, before we didn't do squats. Shoot, those hurt your legs, made you sore. We didn't want to do those. Made us run sprints. We didn't want to do sprints either. Made us learn to do the Olympic lifts that keep you more explosive. Now, we also went through experience during that time, and novelist machines came about. A guy by the name of Arthur Jones. Anybody ever heard of Arthur Jones? Anybody heard of Novelist? Novelist is still a company. They're still strong and going. They still make equipment. But Arthur Jones came along. Very, very interesting man. Actually, Al Miller, after he left college, he went and worked for Arthur Jones for a couple of years. I'll never forget him coming back and telling me stories about Arthur Jones. Arthur Jones had actually been a mercenary, and he was raised, both his parents were physicians. He never completed high school, but a very innovative inventor. Lots of stories on him. He kept, later on, he had a farm in Florida. He kept exotic animals, liked to handle rattlesnakes and other things, alligators. But Arthur Jones was very interesting, and he had a real impact at that time on strength and conditioning. Arthur Jones, as you see the Novelist machine there, the idea behind the Novelist machine was this cam right here. Arthur Jones had studied and looked at different concepts, and what the Novelist machine was supposed to do is, when you lift weights, as you go through, say we're doing a squat, and you go down, you come back up, we have a sticking point, we call it, right? Most of you are familiar with that. Biomechanically, as you do a squat, you go down, you're coming back up. There's a point in which you're at your weakest point biomechanically, your sticking point, we call it. Well, Arthur Jones was trying to overcome that. So he came up with this cam idea that you could keep the resistance constant throughout your range of motion while doing an exercise. And that was the idea, the philosophy behind it. I remember, again, we went through that stage, and I remember Al Miller having me go to a club that was all these novelist machines. And we would get in there, and you'd do one set to failure. Then you'd move over to the next one, do one set to failure. And I was always wanting to do more sets. And I think the guys at the health club knew that if I did 10 sets, you know, that was going to keep all the clients backed up and they weren't going to be able to get through or something like that. So they always convinced me, no, you only have to do one set. But that was sort of Arthur Jones' principle at the time, was doing one set to failure. And that became known as high intensity training or HIIT training. He was the father of HIIT training, high intensity training. And there are different aspects of HIIT training, and there are negative parts of it and there are positive parts of it. What are the negative parts of HIIT training? Well, one thing is you were on a machine and you were sitting down. Now with our training, and those of you that have been around us before, if you watch our training now, how many times do we have you sitting doing an exercise? What's wrong with that? Because in athletics, if you're laying down or sitting down on the basketball court, you're laying down, sitting down on the football field, softball field, volleyball court, what's happened? You got knocked down, you fell down, you're in a bad position. What is it on the athletic field that goes on that's constant is you're on your feet. You're dynamic, you're moving, you're activating the proprioceptors, you're involving the synergistic muscles, the smaller muscles. Is that happening when you're sitting down at a machine? No, it's not. So I remember myself working out through the novelist machines, and I just didn't feel as powerful, I didn't feel as strong. Now, there's some coaches still out there today that believe in HIIT training. Not many. There's a few, not many left. Now, can you take aspects of HIIT training and incorporate it into a workout? Yes, you can. And sometimes I'll even do that. But do I base my whole philosophy on HIIT training? No, I don't. But this was, again, 1970s. That was the era that we were going through. And that was a part of it, novelist training, HIIT training. You don't see many novelist machines being produced anymore at all. We've gotten out of that phase. All right, we're going to go to 1980. So what was big in 1980? And y'all remember this? Pacman Fever. Anybody play Pac-Man in here? A few of you played Pac-Man? Well, I guess it's come back retro now in some games, hasn't it? Parents played Pac-Man. Pac-Man was the rage for a while back in 1980. And what these guys, the computer nerd guys, they would learn the pattern. And so, you know, you had to learn the pattern. I guess if you played about 1,000 times, you'd learn the pattern after you put in that many quarters to play. And then you'd be able to win every time, but I never could get the pattern myself. What else was going on in 1980? Average cost of a new car, $7,200. I bought a car last year, one very big car, $43,000. And that was a small car. $7,200 for a car then. What was the big movie at the time? Caddyshack. One of my favorite all-time movies, Rodney Dangerfield. Bill Murray. Anybody seen Caddyshack in here before? Sure we have. It's on reruns all the time. What else was going on in 1980? Price of gasoline. Now it's over $1 a gallon. High price. We'd die for $1 a gallon right now, wouldn't we? And can't forget the 1980s. This was one of the signature moments, the big hair days. Don't you wish those would come back?
They are.
Some places they are. I know there's some, on one of the satellite radio stations, you can get the Big Hair Days radio station. All right, that sets the tone for what the 1980s was about. Let's go into the strength and conditioning field. In 1978, the NSCA started. This was a big step. It first started in 78, became bigger in the 80s. I've been a member since the 80s in the National Strength and Conditioning Association. The picture you see there, called the godfather of collegiate strength and conditioning, Boyd Epley. I know Boyd well, talked to him a couple weeks ago. Boyd still lives in Colorado Springs and is running the National Strength and Conditioning Association now. And Boyd was a good visionary. He was also, let's go back to the book Outliers. Boyd was at Nebraska, hired as one of their first, well, the first strength coach at Nebraska under Tom Osborne. What did Tom do when he was at Nebraska? He won a few national championships. And after Boyd was hired, they won some national championships. What if they'd gone 0-11? Boyd would probably have been fired and probably wouldn't have started the NSCA. We'd probably be 10 years back, or even maybe more than that. One thing that you find out as I talk here, we're going back to, I started back on this talking about the 1950s and Alvin Roy. And we're up to the 1980s. Well, what have you noticed? The wheels of change move very slow to move, especially at a university. If you go out here to the university here and you say, you know what, let's stop this Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes and let's go to Monday, Wednesday, Saturday classes. What would the professors here at A&M do? It'd be a riot. They'd come out glued. They don't like change. Most people don't like change. We're all creatures of habit. We don't like change. And especially at a university, probably at Texas A&M, once something happens twice, it's a tradition. Don't change it. So the wheels of change with strength and conditioning, like many other aspects, they're very, very slow to change. But the 1980s, Boyd had the vision to start this national organization, and it really started, as it says, bridging the gap between research and what we did with strength and conditioning. People started studying this. One of them that had the most influence on me was, not the big hair guys, Mike Stone. I first met Mike Stone back in the 1980s. I remember he was at Auburn University at the time, and I remember me and a guy by the name of Ronald Byrd, who was department head at Kinesiology department at LSU, a guy by the name of Scotty Powers, who's now at the University of Florida. Some of you may have had his textbook on physiology. Me, Ronald Byrd, and Scotty Powers all rode from Baton Rouge to Auburn to visit Mike Stone and stayed with him a couple of days. And Mike was having the national weightlifting championships there that year. And the first time I got to meet Mike, but Mike was a dedicated lifter who got his PhD and has spent his lifetime studying strength and conditioning, the science behind it. And he's now married to Meg Stone now. She was the first female strength and conditioning coach. She actually was at Arizona. She still holds, I think, one of the shot put records, if I'm not mistaken. She was actually a female football strength and conditioning coach, one of the first and only at Arizona for a few years there. Meg and Mike have come, and I've had them come stay here and talk to our staff before. Great people. But he had a real influence on the strength and conditioning with his research. And there were other people out researching there, and there was other people doing great work on that. This was one that had a real positive influence on me, especially reading this book, and offered a lot of insight. So the 1980s, what's going on is we are getting to where we're bridging more science with what we're doing. We're getting smarter about our training. Mike Stone periodization scheme. I remember we used to do sets and reps. Oh, well, there was a study came out said optimum sets and reps, 3 sets of 10. So we do 3 sets of 10 on everything. We do week 1, 3 sets of 10. Week 2, 3 sets of 10. Week 4, 3 sets of 10. And what was wrong with that? What was wrong? What is when you work out? It's you put a stress, right? Put a stress on the body. adaptation, recovery, recovery, adaptation, right? So stress, recovery, adaptation. Well, what happens after doing the same stress over and over and over? What does the body? The body adapts, right? So now you become accustomed, the body adapts, you're no longer getting the changes that you want. So the Russians were using this model. And I can't even pronounce this guy's name. I'd butcher his name. I can't speak Russian. But the Russians were doing these periodization schemes. Whereas, all of you have seen these before. Volume starts high, volume goes to low, intensity starts low, and intensity moves up. And that's the very simple schematic of periodization. And Mike Stone was one of the first in the U.S. to introduce that theory to us. Now, I got to throw this in. Go back to 1950s. Go back to Alvin Roy. Alvin Roy, again, was over in Europe, and they're at the championship, and the Russians are there, and they were called Russians at the time. I guess they're still called that, but what were the Russians doing? The Russians were doing steroids. They had synthetically produced testosterone. Alvin Roy was hired by the San Diego Chargers, early 1960s. He found out about the Russians. They were taking a little pink pill called Dynabol. And Alvin Roy had the San Diego Chargers. They went to training camp, and he handed out little pink pills at every meal. And their players were encouraged to take them. So he started a strength training program, and they started on Dynabol. So the Russians were here, looking at this model. What else? We got to take into account that steroids were going on. They've been going on. They're going to continue to go on. I remember, now you got to keep this in context. 1960s, steroids weren't illegal. They were easily prescribed by a physician. There weren't any studies out there at that time saying, you're going to have this ill effect or that ill effect. It was like popping a vitamin at the time. And did it have an effect? Well, San Diego Chargers won a championship. One of the first times they'd ever won one, haven't won many since. Alvin Roy went on to the Kansas City Chiefs. They won a championship. He went on to the Oakland Raiders. They won a championship. Think there was any association? Do steroids work? Yeah, they work. You're darn straight. Ask Arnold Schwarzenegger, do they work? Would Arnold Schwarzenegger be where he is today without steroids? No. Now, he might not have a illegitimate child right now. I shouldn't say that. That's a joke there. But anyway. But if y'all know that story. Anyway, to get back to my point, though. Steroids are involved. I remember in the 1970s, I worked out at a local Y where all the powerlifters worked out. And I remember being approached by several of the powerlifters. One's a PhD, and he's like, do you want to get on steroids? And I said, I don't know, I got to think about it. So I was going to do the smart thing. I went back and I researched, and I found out, well, they said it's a placebo effect, the research did at the time. And I went back to him and says, no, I don't need them. It's a placebo effect. I said, okay. Well, what happened is those studies I went and read at that time, they used therapeutic dosages in the studies. What was going on in the real world? They were taking 10 times that dosage. And so, I can't say that, I've never taken a steroid in my life. Now, I may later, these anti-aging effects they have, but anyway, that's another story. But anyway, I've never taken one, and I can sincerely say that, but what if at the time they weren't illegal, everybody took them, there wasn't any drug testing? I may have, so I can't say, that I'm sitting here above all that, but that was the nature and the culture at the time. Am I for steroids? No. I think it needs to be a level playing field. We need to, all be off of them. But are they something? There's an elephant in the room. We need to address that sometimes, and it does occur. All right. Now we got to go back. I'm running out of time. Yes, sir. I got to get to the 90s here. All right, 1990. Operation Desert Storm. Now these are some of the things y'all can remember. Gasoline's up to $1.16 a gallon. Movie of the year, Home Alone. Home Alone #1. Haven't they made about 10 of those now? Janet Jackson, Album of the Year. How many listened to that? Nobody here? And Furby, the Toy of the Year. By 1990s, every Division I program now has a strength and conditioning coach for the major sports, and they're mainly for football and basketball at that time. But everybody has a Division I coach at that time, and it's, if you're at a small school, maybe you didn't have the budget for it, but almost everybody does. So we see that happening. Another thing that happened in the 90s that wasn't happening before, there was more emphasis on summer conditioning programs. I remember we started one in the early 90s. Now, it's even, NCAA has made them where they're required workouts in the summer for football. They finally got smart about that. Let's give the guys, let's not make them lift weights all summer, get acclimated, then come in August, and why are we having people pass out and not acclimated? So they got a little smarter on that. All right, I'm going to jump fast. I'm running out of time here. 2000s. How many remember Y2K? Oh yeah, it was the end of the world, wasn't it? We survived it, didn't we? All right, movie of the year. Russell Crowe, Gladiator. And Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Well, I didn't miss Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Favorite show. And let's look at the 2000 cell phone. We thought that was the device at that time. Little did we know. And of course, your favorite band for all you young ladies out there, NSYNC. All right. 2000s. The Collegiate Strength and Conditioning Association formed in the year 2000. Now, this was our first conference in 2001. This was the number of collegiate strength coaches. We'd have to have a picture about 10 times here 14 years later to show that. Dr. Chuck Stiggins, and I could talk a lot about Chuck Stiggins, he started this organization. The NSCA, Boyd Epley, a lot of the collegiate strength coaches wanted their own identity. So Chuck Stiggins started this organization, very powerful, very much helping us get our science levels up, organizing strength and conditioning coaches, and it's been a very beneficial in our field. One of the big events that's happened with strength and conditioning, we'll have our 14th conference in Salt Lake City this May. If those of you have a future in this field, you need to join this organization. All right, 2000s. What's happening? Strength and conditioning staffs continue to expand. When I started, there were 2 of us full-time here. Now there are 11 of us full-time. The specialization of strength and conditioning coaches. We have strength coaches that just work football only. We have strength coaches work basketball only. We have strength coaches work baseball only. The specialization trend is continuing as we go. There's more emphasis on golf strength and conditioning programs, tennis strength and conditioning programs. That's what we're continuing to see in the 2000s. Now, remember that old periodization scheme? This is what periodization schemes we do now. Look at the amount of planning that goes into them. You take a whole year and do a periodization plan with it, and you plan it out in detail. A lot of difference from that first one we saw back from Mike Stone's era. Of course, Mike Stone does these periodization plans now also. The future. What does the future hold? Well, screening, monitoring. I'm seeing more. We do DEXA scans now. Every athlete comes in, we'll do a DEXA scan when they come in, we'll do a DEXA scan. We're looking at lean body mass, body fat percentages. You can even see bone density, even though bone density is not a concern most of them this age. We wear heart rate monitors. We had a basketball player on our team this year who was wearing one of these heart rate monitors, and you can remotely see what's going on, and he all of a sudden had a heart rate that's staying up in 140 range, 140. Very, very high. What happens? Heart becomes very efficient around 100 beats, right? Why is that? The diastole doesn't have time for the ventricle to fill, right? Oh, y'all know that. Anyway, he became very efficient, had to have a surgery procedure from wearing these. You also have GPS monitoring on this. What efficient is GPS monitoring? Take a girl on the soccer team this weekend that's in the playoffs in North Carolina, and you could measure the acceleration, distances she runs. What are you going to do with that? Now that you make that their conditioning. You emulate what they do on the field with your conditioning program by using a GPS device. Recording and analyzing. We record everything now. And with the technology improving, that's even going to be greater in the future for us. And my time is up. I got 3:52, so gives me time for a couple of questions because I got to get back and work a team out.
Coach has got to work with the team here pretty quick, so if you have any questions, feel free. I know some of you sent questions, but take advantage of the opportunity if you can.
Any questions, anybody?
They need a Thanksgiving break, it looks like.
Okay, thank you for your time. Hopefully I enlightened you a little bit on the history of strength and conditioning. Thank you.
For those that came in a little bit later, can they visit with you right before you